In the court of Stannis Baratheon, the king's men remain faithful to the Seven, which is the majority religion in Westeros. While at odds with the so-called Queen's men who worship R'hllor, the two groups are not mutually hostile, though have adopted different training regimens. The king's men focus on the greatsword and what mobility their heavy armor allows, also carrying with them an unwavering conviction to the one true king, Stannis Baratheon. Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video I'm doing something a little different. Typically when units come around, I usually find a commander that I want to work with and then build around there like we have in the past with my old tactics discussion videos. And those aren't going away or anything, but with the huge thaw on releases that's happening over this early part of summer, late part of spring, from Cool Mini or Not, there's just a slew of units coming out within the next month or so, and one of the viewers had suggested that I do something like this where we focus down on units, and I really liked the idea of it considering the climate of releases. So with this one, we're going to be focusing in on the Kingsmen for House Baratheon.
The Kingsmen are a combat infantry unit that comes with 5 unique sculpts among the 12 miniatures that are in this box. They don't include a unique combat attachment for them, but the Baratheons are not really lacking any options in that department. Flipping over to the back of the card for the Kingsmen first, we see that they've got the Loyalty Stannis Baratheon rule, which means that this unit cannot mix with Renly loyalty units at all, and that makes sense given the fluff direction of the card and all that. They also come in at 7 points, which is probably the elite point for combat infantry units. I mean, cavalry are kind of that's kind of like a lot of them start out at 7, and that kind of makes them kind of basic cavalry. But for combat infantry, 7 puts them into a very pointed, specific role, or they've got the stats that are stacked up to make them kind of well-rounded for a lot of different roles. So let's flip that card over and see what else the Kingsmen are bringing to a Stannis Baratheon army. Looking at the raw numbers for the Kingsmen, we see they've got a movement speed of 5, they have a 4+ defense save, and a 6+ morale. When we go to their greatsword attack stat, they hit on 3s or better, then they have a 7/6/4 decay rate on that, depending on how many ranks they have. So looking at a lot of these numbers, they don't really kind of jump out as elite stats, especially for something that's so heavily armored, at least in their sculpts. But speed 5 is pretty decent in terms of movement for some of these Baratheon units. That, you know, I'm thinking about things like Rose Knights or Champions of the Stag or Wardens, but these guys kind of line up a little bit more with Sentinels and have a very similar defensive stat, which is pretty middle of the road, with the morale being a little bit above average. But that greatsword attack is pretty nice. That it kind of shows through that Baratheon sustain of having them hit on 3s, so they're super duper accurate, very well trained. You know, that's kind of that 3+ stat is really kind of representative of the eliteness of a combat unit these days in 1.7 or the 2021 update. But the decay rate on this unit is phenomenal. They start out with 7, which is a lot of dice. Going to 6 on your second rank is still plenty of attacks. 4 isn't so great, but there's a lot of things we can do to try and make that not happen with this unit. Let's go ahead and take a look at the unit's abilities to show what it is that really makes these Kingsmen unique in the Baratheon army. They have several orders here, the first of which is the King's Blade. This triggers after this unit is attacked. You search your tactics deck or discard pile, for 1 Hours is the Fury card, and add it to your hand. You shuffle your tactics deck later. The second order they come with is called To the Last. This triggers when this unit would be destroyed. This unit performs 1 morale test. On a success, it is not destroyed, but remains in play with 1 wound, then becomes panicked and vulnerable. The final ability that they've got is tied to their melee attack, and that is Sundering. So being able to fish out Ours is the Fury, not just from your tactics deck, but from your discard pile as well, is definitely one of the big features on this unit. I would say all of these are big features in terms of basically everything on their card. But Ours is the Fury, I think a lot of people are going to end up fishing this out, thinking that they need to be able to use this as a response to play on the Kingsmen right away, which is fine. I mean, getting +1 to hit to go to 2+ is nice, and then you could also maybe get Vicious, but you don't need the Sundering at all on this one. But this also is you can kind of use this as a supportive role where your opponent might try to plan for something like Ours is the Fury after attacking the Kingsmen, and they know that they're going to get that Kingsblade order to go off, so they'll put something that's a little bit more survivable or resilient to some of these attack modifiers. But when after getting hit with that opposing unit and triggering the Kingsblade, going to find Ours is the Fury can also help you set up a unit that might not have access to many of these other abilities, and then kind of put the pressure in another area on your opponent to just kind of do some things that they didn't see coming. I think that Ours is the Fury is definitely one of the big equalizers in the Baratheon-based tactics deck, being able to give you all these different stats when certain units might not have access to all of those, is going to make it so that the Kingsmen are a unit your opponent's going to have to think twice about attacking, because not only do you get this Ours is the Fury card out of it, but they're unlikely to wipe multiple ranks on the first contact with them, and this unit is only slightly less dangerous on its second rank of attacks than on its first. So I think, and they're not likely to fail their morale tests either after getting attacked. So the Kingsmen are just kind of like a catch-22 unit for your opponent to have to deal with. They really don't want to, but if they don't, you're just going to be able to tear off and do a bunch of work with Sundering throwing as many dice as they do. Now, taking a look at their other order to the last, this also is extremely dangerous in the hands of a Baratheon player, particularly for this unit as well. The morale test they're likely to pass. We do have other ways we can make sure that their morale stats are a little bit better, or make sure that we can pass this type of morale test when it comes up. But this is another thing where your opponent's going to be putting a lot of resources into trying to deal with the Kingsmen, and once you get this order off, it's not very good that they become panicked and vulnerable, but very specifically, none of those condition tokens affect their combat output, so having one wound lets them heal back up if they need to. You can get rid of one of those condition tokens, probably the vulnerable one, just to make sure that 4+ defense stat can actually get you places, and then you're getting to the point where you're close to your second rank in terms of bodies. And there's plenty of other Baratheon cards that'll let you heal that back up too. And this unit can get really dangerous really quick. This order to the last is phenomenal in the Baratheon army. And mostly because if you go back and watch the Baratheon's tactics deck and faction identity video, which I'll link in the description below, there's definitely a lot of opportunities for Baratheons to kind of rebound and get back into the game either through wounds or using a lot of their higher attack stats when they are lower on ranks. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of the attachments that the Baratheons have available to them that we can use to kind of help beef up the Kingsmen a little bit. First up, we have Devon Seaworth, the King's Squire. He comes in at 1 point and has the order Reckless Heroism. When this unit performs a charge action, before resolving that action, this unit suffers D3 wounds, but counts as rolling a 6 for any charge distance dice. They also have the ability that attaches to melee or ranged attacks called True Conviction. If this unit is a Baratheon unit, each time it attacks an enemy with more remaining ranks, it may reroll any attack dice. So Devon is a very inexpensive way to make sure that your combat units are going to get stuck in, and since the Kingsmen have such a phenomenal decay stat for their attacks, taking that D3 wounds isn't going to bother you so much, and when you look at something like True Conviction, you're also not too concerned about getting some wounds on these units to try and make sure that you can re-roll these anytime you want to, because you will very often be stuck in combat for a prolonged period of time, and that's not only what the state of the game is, but it's also what the Baratheons kind of excel at doing. So you're likely to, early on, probably, like if you end up taking like the first hit or something like that, you'll be able to make sure True Conviction goes off. But once you've kind of ground through that combat, that first unit you connect with, you're able to use this to go into maybe a fresh unit that your opponent has to make sure you're always getting those rerolls. But the real big reason to take Devon is so that you can automatically just get that 6 on any of your charge distance dice. It lets you kind of deal with some of the problems that come along with terrain, and you can also just kind of slingshot around the table at your will. I mean, because you're moving 5, and then on top of that, it just means you're moving 11 inches. So a 16-inch threat from wherever you're at with these guys, not factoring in any surge fourths, is pretty good for 1 point on a unit that really doesn't need any combat help. It's just that Devon gives you the things you need to get you where you want to be in terms of combat. Another good attachment for the Kingsmen is maybe a little bit of a rude one. You might feel a little dirty after doing it, is Axel Florent, the Fanatical Devotee. So Axel Florent comes in at 2 points as an attachment, and the big reason why it's kind of rude to put these on the Kingsmen is because he has the rule called Affiliation Relore, where he just turns them into a Relore unit, and the Kingsmen, of course, are the ones that still believe in the faith of the Seven. So like putting Axel on there is kind of like, maybe it's fluffy too instead of rude, where they're slowly converting over to the faith of Relore, and maybe that's how you can sell it, but it still feels a little dirty to me. The other things that he ends up bringing to the unit is Zealous Fanaticism. This unit's melee attacks gain Vicious and always roll their highest attack die value. The unit suffers 1 wound for each attack die roll of 1. So this is a pretty legit ability for them. Just always having Vicious on top of Sundering means that they're going to be likely to push a lot more damage through than what they would normally, which is a ton. And just suffering the wounds for the die roll of 1 isn't a big deal, because you do have that order to the last should that get a little bit spicy. Plus you're hitting pretty accurately, so your rerolls should be able to get you through that if you're charging. The real big thing to notice about this one is that on the card it has the little heart symbol next to it, and that means that no matter what your opponent does to this unit, they cannot take this rule away outside of just killing Axel Florent, one of the ways that you can target attachments these days. The final thing he brings to the unit is Intimidating Presence. This just says, enemies engaged with this unit suffer -1 to morale test rolls and +1 rune from panic dice. So on top of the Zealous Fanaticism giving you Vicious, you're also getting another -1 to that, so you kind of have super Vicious, and then also having that +1 wound from failing panic tests makes it so that this unit actually can get pretty close to just steamrolling a unit completely. Everything would have to go perfect for you, and everything would have to go terrible for them, but they could actually get really close to doing it depending on what you can make happen with this. So I think Axel Florent, when you first look at him at 2 points, seems like a pretty pricey thing to be putting on a 7-point unit, but if you're working with a list that really wants to have Relore units, the Kingsmen can benefit quite a bit from that one, outside of just becoming a panic terror ball of doom, as your opponent not only has to deal with a bunch of Sundering attacks that hit on 3s, but also now has to deal with -3 panic tests that are +1 wound on top of it. Now we can focus our attention on commanders that really synergize well with the Kingsmen unit, and the first one that I want to go over is Andrew Estermont, first of the Kingsmen. So Andrew Estermont has the True Conviction ability that we saw with Devon Seaworth, so if he's attacking any unit that has more ranks than him, his unit gets to reroll all their attack dice. He also comes with the rule or ability First of the Kingsmen. You count as controlling the Crown and the Tactic Zone for cards that target this unit. So this ability just on its own is probably one of the big reasons why you would want him in a Kingsmen unit. If you are using Ours is the Fury on them, the one that you get from their first order, I forget what it was called already, but if you're using Ours is the Fury on the Kingsmen unit, then you don't have to worry about how early it happens. Some of your opponents might want to try and mitigate you getting a lot of value out of it by trying to get you to pull it early, and that's just going to clog up your hand, and you have to wait until you claim those zones to get the extra abilities. But Andrew Estermont doesn't really care about that, and a lot of the Baratheon tactics cards, all of their bonuses for controlling these zones are quite substantial and go a long way to either push that combat prowess forward or heal up a unit and make sure that it sustains longer. So Andrew Estermont really likes to find his home inside a Kingsmen unit. And without going too deep into Andrew Estermont's tactics cards that he ends up bringing, when you take a look at them, he is essentially Aggression the guy. His first card is Assault Orders, so whenever a friendly NCU claims a zone, you can replace the effect with a combat unit gets to make a free attack action, or if it targets his unit, they get to charge for free, or if they get a free charge action. Sorry. So with the Kingsmen, all of these are really great. Being able to get extra attacks and also not really caring too much about what zone you have, depending on what kind of card plans you have for other units. You don't have to worry too much about like trying to go after that crown and tactics board zone. Also, the type of list that he builds doesn't really seem to focus too much on panic-based stuff. So being able to exchange the ability of the crown zone so you can actually claim it and do something with it with assault orders is a pretty big bonus for him. And I think up until now with the Kingsmen and Queensmen, Andrew Estermont hasn't had a real great aggressive unit to kind of roll around with on the Baratheon side for Stannis, because all of it's been a lot of like R'hllor. Well, it's only been the R'hllor faithful up until recently, but the Kingsmen are really good for him for a lot of these reasons. For they're an extremely aggressive unit. That's all they want to do is charge. Next up, he has the Reckless Fury card. So this triggers when a friendly unit's performing a melee attack. Before rolling their attack dice, they'll gain Vicious, and they roll their highest attack die value. And then afterwards, when they complete the attack, they suffer 2 wounds, -1 for each destroyed rank. So this is a great card to play on someone play on a Kingsmen unit after the To the Last order's been played out. Not only do you get Vicious and roll your highest attack die value when your opponent might not have been ready for that, the 2 wounds that you would suffer doesn't really affect you at all because, it just straight up doesn't affect you because you will only have 1 thing left in that unit or 1 wound left in that unit. So Reckless Fury, in addition to just being a good card to help sustain a little bit longer, is perfect for the Kingsmen because when they get down to those low ranks, this card lets them stay very, very active in the game. So no matter how many losses you've taken or how much your opponent's really worked on this Kingsmen unit, Andrew Estermont's going to make sure that they stick around for the long haul and become dangerous until the very end of the game. The final card that Andrew Estermont ends up bringing is Rush of Aggression, and this is kind of going into the same line of like why I think Devon Seaworth is good. It's just that they get to automatically count as rolling a 6 on all their charge dice, but they also get to gain Critical Blow, and if that attack or after the attack's been completed, the unit becomes vulnerable, which isn't a really huge deal. You're able to try and mitigate those condition tokens as best you can with things like Shira Arrow and just taking the coin zone on its own. Not to mention there's a few other Baratheon-based tactics cards that can help you move those around. So I know that this was not like a normal focus on commanders, so that I didn't go into too many details about Andrew Estermont and how he plays, but I just wanted to give you kind of an outline of like, this is a commander that can take this unit and really make it sing with him. So let's look at one of the other commanders just to kind of give a better well-rounded view of some other options the Kingsmen have to them through some of the tinkering you can do with the commanders. The other commander we're going to take a look at for the Kingsmen is going to be Stannis Baratheon, the One True King. This is the one from the Heroes attachment, or the Heroes box 1 instead of the core Baratheon box. But he gives the affiliation R'hllor to a unit that he drops in, so he's converting his Kingsmen in this case. So that's another one of those either rude or fluffy things, depending on the way you look at it. He has the ability Dauntless, so each time this unit passes a morale test, it restores 1 wound. And then Iron Resolve gives the unit +1 to panic test rolls, and they suffer -1 wound from failing those panic test rolls. So 6+ is like, it's above average, but not by much when it comes to morale. So Stannis Baratheon ends up really kind of solidifying their resolve, right? And I guess that's why they call it Iron Resolve. Good one, Brian. So, They kick it up to basically a 5+ morale. They suffer 1 less wound from those panic test rolls if they happen to fail them. So this turns the one mitigating factor. I mean, like, they're 4+ armor, so vulnerable tokens or whatever, but having a 5+ morale is a pretty dang good stat to have on a unit that's supposed to be this aggressive. In terms of what Stannis brings for commander cards for this unit, the first one in R'hllor's name is nice, especially if you're going to be running a non-R'hllor Kingsmen unit. You just end up getting critical blow and sundering if you're a R'hllor unit. If you're not a R'hllor unit, you only get one of those. So giving crit blow to the Kingsmen unit is pretty sweet. Also, if you didn't destroy a unit, you suffer a panic test with -2 to the roll. That's not so great for Kingsmen, but they have the raw attack stat to be able to kind of use this to help clean up a unit that might be on the cusp of going based on their attack stat. Getting that critical blow means that you're likely to get 1 or 2 of those, depending on, average-wise says you should get 1, but I like when I get over 6, I'm like, I could get 2, it would be sweet. But depending on the attachments you have as well, you can start re-rolling those and start fishing for more criticals. But In R'hllor's Name is nice for trying to help out the already phenomenal combat presence of the Kingsmen. The next one is probably the one I like the most that he brings to the Kingsmen unit is Test of Faith. So you target a friendly R'hllor unit and then they suffer a panic test. If this is Stannis' unit, that panic test doesn't really bother you so much. Also, 6+, you're likely to pass anyways. You attach this card to that unit and then remove it after an enemy completes an attack on this unit. So this is another fun thing that you don't have to wait for your opponent to come into. They do get to kind of plan around it a little bit, but sometimes this could be scary for them and make them stay away from some of these units. But essentially, up until you get attacked by an enemy, you have +1 to your defense dice rolls. So that takes the Kingsmen up to a 3+ save, and that's really dangerous. That makes them extremely survivable, and your opponent's going to want to try and do things like focus down on a condition token on them for vulnerable to try and break through that. But if they are doing that, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to do their attacks at the same time unless they've got shenanigans like mark the target or something like that. So it gives you the opportunity to respond. Otherwise, you've just got a really solid Kingsmen unit running around. If you figure Stannis' unit of Kingsmen have this on them, they're running around with a 3+ defense save and a 5+ morale. It turns them into a really survivable nightmare that your opponent doesn't want to deal with because they're average survivability stats are one of the things that kind of helps balance them out, and this really shifts that balance. The final card that Stannis ends up bringing to the list is Azor Ahai, and this is one of those classic, I like to call them oh shit cards, where if you fail a panic test, or you take your panic test and you don't trigger this until after the dice have been rolled so you get to see what the results are, the unit can only suffer 1 wound maximum from failing this test. So this is like if you throw a 3 and your opponent's got modifiers to throw more damage on you for panic, you can just stop that and say I'm only taking 1 wound and you're not going to be able to try and do any more damage to this unit than you are, which is nice for Kingsmen because they get to stick around longer, and failing panic on them is, it's on anything it's going to be bad, but for them, any kind of extra damage your opponent does to help get them down to that very last rank is a place you don't want to be at. And if you do happen to target a R'hllor unit with this one, they just automatically pass the test instead, and then all units engaged with them, or all enemy units, become panicked. And if you are kind of leaning more into some of that R'hllor stuff, you can really get some work done. Like we were talking about Axel earlier, and if he was on a unit that got this played on them, it would just be devastating for your opponent to be like, I'm putting some extra panic on you, and then you just say, nope, I'm going to auto-pass this test, and then next turn I'm going to have you be panicked while I'm doing a -3 test, and you're getting your D3 +1 extra wound suffered to you. So it doesn't seem like it up front that it has the aggressive application, since Kingsmen don't have a whole lot to do with panic test, but we do have ways to get vicious, of course, so there's always ways to make any R'hllor unit scary with panic, and when you put out those condition tokens, it's just more ways to get them to do more damage and start plowing through your opponent's stuff with this unit being extremely scary. The final synergy I want to talk about with this unit doesn't rely on commanders or attachments or anything like that. It's more of a unit synergy and more so much a list building synergy that can kind of open up. So the Kingsmen are good. I think at 7 points you have to really stop and ask yourself a lot of questions about, do I want to actually run 2 of these? Their combat output is amazing, and they have a lot of great rules attached to them. They are extremely expensive. 7 points isn't an extreme expense, but it is very elite, and that's 14 points of your list gone. And then when you factor in NCUs, which you'll probably be running 2 of them, you're looking at potentially having spent 20 to 24 points of your army already. And, 24 is a little bit extreme, but you're already putting half your points in NCUs and this, so it doesn't leave you a whole lot of room for attachments or some of those other more tanky, pricey Baratheon units. I mean, you're kind of like, I'm going to bring 2 Kingsmen and then fill it out with Wardens. But one of the very specific things that's phenomenal about what a Stannis Baratheon loyalty army can do is bringing the Dragonstone Noble. Now, for 4 points, you get this solo cavalry dude who just runs around and is a terror on the table with amazing stats. And he allows you the ability to put more activations on the table that can actually do things without having to really commit a whole lot of points to it. And that frees up a lot of build space to where you can do something like run a Dragonstone Noble or 2 and then 2 more units of Baratheon Wardens. So now you've got 6 activations on the table, 2 NCUs, one of them might even be Melisandre depending on how your points shake out. And I haven't 100% crunched the math right now, but I think you might have a little bit of room for attachments, so you could do something like get Stannis in one unit and Axel Florent in the other, and then you've got this really nasty panic test-focused army that also has a lot of combat capability to it, and really kind of makes the list just super dangerous on all sorts of fronts. It's like the Baratheons have always, like at least in my opinion, had this sustained assault, fight till the bitter end, but with these particular units being tilted in this way to that more R'hllor style of gameplay, you become an extremely aggressive army that can really steamroll through things quite quickly. So if your opponent doesn't have the ability to protect against some of those morale shenanigans, they're going to be suffering pretty hard from a Stannis list that's got a couple Kingsmen running around in it. So this was the first time I've ever done a unit-focused discussion, and we kind of went off into other areas to show here are some of the things that kind of build into the synergy with it, and even kind of spitball the list, even though I didn't really put one all together. Let me know in the comments section below what you think of these. This video went a little bit longer than what I would have liked it to, as I talk more at the end of the video, making it longer still. But I really do want to know what people think of this, and see if I should kind of continue this out for the rest of the units. Some of them might get a little less chunky. I think the Kingsmen had a lot to talk about with them. But I think just to round it out, we'll probably do the Queensmen and see how people feel about these. But I really do want to hear back from all of you, because your feedback is one of the things that kind of helps fuel the direction for things that I'm doing with the channel right now. So as I'm kind of feeling out this new 2021 world and seeing how things need to be, or seeing how I want to address things or put things out there into my own channel. So thanks for watching this one, and I've really been enjoying doing all of the Ice and Fire stuff lately, and look forward to doing more in the very near future.